Now, this part of the chapter discusses the movement of carbon dioxide. It also talks about the control of breathing and the effect of exercise on breathing. So this shows a summary of the movement of carbon dioxide. As we know, carbon dioxide is produced by the cells due to the metabolic processes, and then it dissolves and diffuses from the cells into the plasma. Part of carbon dioxide just remains dissolved in plasma, while some carbon dioxide attaches to hemoglobin to produce carbaminohemoglobin, and the remaining of carbon dioxide, and this is what happens to the majority actually of carbon dioxide, is that it unites with water by the action of an enzyme known as carbonic anhydrase enzyme to produce carbonic acid, H2CO3, that breaks down into bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. All of these are happening within the red blood cell. The hydrogen ion remains in the RBC, while the bicarbonate ion diffuses out in exchange for another negative ion, and that is chloride. Now, that exchange of bicarb for chloride is known as the chloride shift. Now, this red blood cell will carry the carbon dioxide in the three different forms that we've talked about from the cell until it reaches the alveolus. At the alveolus, the opposite is going to happen. So again, dissolved carbon dioxide is what we need in order for carbon dioxide to diffuse out into the alveolus and then be exhaled. And the carbon dioxide that is attached to hemoglobin would have to detach. And everything in this reaction is going to go in reverse. So chloride ion will leave the RBC, come back in the bicarbonate ion that combines with the hydrogen ion to make carbonic acid. Then it breaks down into a water and carbon dioxide molecule. Now this is a free carbon dioxide that has the ability to diffuse out of the red blood cell and then through the capillary into the alveolus to be exhaled. Now, before we learn about the control of breathing, we want to find out where are the respiratory centers. Those are found in the brainstem. There is a center found in the pons, and that is known as the pneumotaxic center. And there are two centers in the medulla, one towards the front, known as the ventral respiratory group, and another one in the back, known as the dorsal respiratory group. Now, in order for us to breathe, we need to send an impulse through the phrenic nerve to the diaphragm and through other somatic nerves to the external intercostal muscles. Now, those orders, or the orders for these muscles to contract, eventually come from the medullary centers. Now, these muscles contract. There is the inflation of the lungs with air. That inflation will stretch the lung tissue, leading to the stimulation of the stretch receptors that are found in the lungs. These stretch receptors are then going to send a signal to inhibit the medullary inspiratory neurons, which are these dorsal group, ending the inspiratory process. And again, expiration happens by the elastic recoil of the lungs. Different drugs like morphine, barbiturates, fentanyl, and heroin can suppress the medullary inspiratory neurons and can eventually lead to death due to respiratory failure because of the inhibition of that respiratory center. The reflex that we talked about that was initiated due to the stimulation of the stretch receptors is known as the Herring-Brewer reflex. Our breathing is also controlled by the different chemicals in the body, so the levels of oxygen and the levels of carbon dioxide. Those levels are detected by chemoreceptors. Some of the chemoreceptors are found central, meaning in the CNS, while other chemoreceptors are found in the peripheries, and those are known as the peripheral chemoreceptors. They are found in the aortic bodies, that is found in the arch of the aorta, and other chemoreceptors are found in the carotid bodies, that are found at the bifurcation of the common carotid into an external and internal carotid arteries. These, again, the carotid and the aortic chemoreceptors, are going to detect changes in levels of oxygen and levels of carbon dioxide and pH levels. The peripheral chemoreceptors, those detect changes, as we mentioned, in the arterial blood. They are stimulated by severe hypoxia. They are also stimulated due to increase in the hydrogen ion concentrations, for example, in metabolic acidosis, which could happen, for example, in diabetic patients due to the accumulation of ketone bodies. They're also stimulated in the increased levels of PCO2, and that's known as respiratory acidosis. So if anybody has, for whatever reason, they are hypoventilating, there is a decrease in the rate of breathing. That will lead to the accumulation of carbon dioxide in our bloodstream, and that is going to be picked up by the peripheral chemoreceptors, leading to the stimulation of breathing. As for the central chemoreceptors, those are found in the medulla oblongata, and those are affected by the changes in pH levels. So their main stimulus is the accumulation of carbon dioxide, but carbon dioxide cannot pass the blood-brain barrier. The hypercapnia, or the increase in carbon dioxide, is translated into acidosis, high hydrogen ion concentrations, or low pH levels, and that is what is going to stimulate the central chemoreceptors. That is the reason when we give patients oxygen, we prefer to add a little bit of carbon dioxide to keep these central chemoreceptors stimulated. 100% oxygen can eventually lead to tricking the brain into thinking that we no longer need to breathe because we are 100% saturated with oxygen. So again, adding a little bit of carbon dioxide is going to stimulate these breathing receptors. And the main stimulus for breathing actually is not hypoxia, it is the hypercapnia. It is the accumulation of carbon dioxide and that acidity. You see here that in order for the peripheral chemoreceptors to be stimulated, there would have to be a significant decrease in pressures of oxygen. So less than 50% saturation, that would lead to the stimulation of these peripheral chemoreceptors. So again, the main stimulus to breathe is the hypercapnia, the accumulation of CO2. Now these are the changes that happen to ventilation during exercise. This, you see during exercise that there is a gradual increase in ventilation, but what is is very noticeable here is that increase in ventilation rates, increase in breathing that occurs before exercising. And that is because the body is preparing to exercise. The body knows that you're about to exercise. The brain sends out impulses to the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles to start contracting. As you warm up, your joints are sending impulses again to stimulate breathing. So you will see that there is an increase in ventilation before you exercise. And then at the end of exercise, ventilation goes down, but not down to its normal level. And then it gradually decreases during the recovery phase until it goes back to baseline. You can see here the stimulus for the increase in ventilation for exercise. So as we mentioned, that the motor cortex, just like it sends out impulses to the skeletal muscles to contract, it'll also, one of those skeletal muscles happens to be the diaphragm and the external intercostals. It'll also send impulses to the respiratory center to increase breathing, increase ventilation even before we exercise. And again, the joints send out stimulatory impulses to the respiratory centers as well. You can see here that all of these local changes that are happening, the increased metabolism, meaning that there is accumulation of CO2 and accumulation of hydrogen ions. There is an increased demand of oxygen. Those are picked up by the chemoreceptors. The increase in body temperature also stimulates respiration. And that conditioned response, knowing that you are about to exercise or you're actually exercising, so as a conditioned response to that would be to hyperventilate. As we exercise, there's also an increase in plasma epinephrines and potassium concentrations. Both of these are going to stimulate the respiratory centers. Epinephrine is elevated because of the sympathetic system. The increase in potassium concentrations, there are lots of theories out there. One of the theories would be because the muscles are contracting and there's this constant sodium-potassium pump that is always pumping potassium out of the cells in order to maintain muscle contraction. And the theory is that all of that potassium being pumped out of the cell will eventually reach the bloodstream, so that high levels of plasma concentration of potassium stimulates the respiratory center. So we do know that it does that for sure, but we are not sure why potassium levels increase. And that ends this chapter.